Hello everyone, Books with Banks back again with another video, and today I just watched Jimmy Nuts and Alan on Chatting with Nuts talk about all the plethora of top 10 lists, and I realized I haven't made a top 10 list in a while, so this one's specifically for you guys. I know how much you guys love and never get tired of seeing top 10 lists, so here you go. But no, in all seriousness, in a recent book club meeting that I had with my wife and our friends, we were going into our Goodreads, looking at the books we've given 5 stars, any books we've given 1 or 2 stars, just kind of to see what our spectrums were like. And I was seeing I don't have a ton of books that I've given 5 stars to, and then I started to kind of look at those and think, okay, what 10 out of these might actually be my favorite books of all time. I don't believe I've ever done something exactly like this on my channel, so I figured why not do it right now. So that's what I want to do today really quickly, is to just go through my 10 favorite books of all time. I will say that anyone who's been a fan of my channel for a while probably knows that I'm a really big fan of Stephen Erickson and Ian Esselman's Malazan Book of the Fallen series, the collection of different series that they've both contributed there. If it was doing more than one book by each author on this series, a lot of Malazan from both Erickson and Esselman would make it on here, but I think just to add a little more diversity to the list, I'll just keep it one book per author. Now, that's not to say there won't be a couple Malazan books on here, though, so bear that in mind. But yeah, we're definitely doing one book per author. I'll also add there will be 2 books. I'll just throw up an image of them when I talk about them. I actually don't have a current copy of either of these in my collection, and I'd really like to change that sometime soon. I'll also add that I won't be spoiling any of the books I talk about. So here goes. In 10th place, I have what many consider to be one of the first, if not the first, sci-fi novel, and that is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I read this, oh goodness, maybe 10 years ago or so, and it's such a fascinating story, and just kind of the twists and turns that it takes you on, especially if you're like go into this expecting it to be exactly like the classic horror films, or kind of the more typical beats that you might expect a Frankenstein story to follow. The original story here, it definitely goes in a few directions that I was not expecting, and I highly recommend this book to anyone, even anyone who thinks they know what Frankenstein's about and thinks they don't necessarily need to read it. If you haven't read it, definitely give it a try. It's really haunting and really unsettling, and it's just a blast. So yeah, 10th place, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Then in 9th place, and this is one that I don't have, but I'm going to put Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. I read this when I was a senior in high school. I was in a lit class where it was really cool. For like every reading assignment, or kind of the different quarters throughout the year, it wasn't just you have to read this one book. We always had like a selection of 5 or 6 to read from, and then you would read your book with the group of 3 or 4 other students who also chose, or who also made that same choice. And Brave New World was one of the books that I read there. We'll talk about another in a minute here, but Brave New World, I kind of went into it expecting, this is going to be dystopian, Fahrenheit 451 maybe, Giver-ish, something like that. You know, a lot of these things that they'll have students read in school. This book just totally upended all of that. Just how Huxley takes our character, or just how Huxley first peels back the layers to show us exactly how this utopia world works, and then how he shows what life is like outside of that society, what it's like for our protagonist to visit people outside of their utopia, and then bringing somebody back in almost as like a test to see if this place holds up to outside scrutiny, to test that society. And really, this was one of the first times that I just had such a blast speaking with other students and peers about a book that we were reading, and like talking about it on like a really deep analytical level. And I kind of, through this book and other books I read in that same high school class, discovered my love of doing this, of talking about books like this, and really digging deeper into these stories. So yeah, if let's say you've avoided Brave New World because you're worried it might just be another dystopian book, I should definitely give it a try, especially if you've been like a fan of things like Fahrenheit 451 or 1984, things like that. I'd say give Brave New World a try. It's much different, reads much different than those, but deals with some of the same issues, just the way Huxley, I guess the journey Huxley takes the characters on to explore those ideas. That's what I find very fascinating about Brave New World. So then in 8th place, the other book that I don't have a physical copy of, and we go from a darker, really serious dystopian novel to a totally absurd war novel. This is Catch-22 by Joseph Heller, another book that I read in that same class. And this was one of the first times that I was reading a book and I wasn't sure what was supposed to be funny. I kind of had to learn and teach myself how to read satire or how to read absurdity. Especially because it's a war book, and when you think about World War II, it's a very serious thing. But just the out of order way this story's told, the different little snapshots of life on this airbase in I guess they're in the Mediterranean, I think. And just all the different wacky personalities that are gathered here. It's so much fun, especially once you kind of get into the tone and the feel of the book. That you have a character named Major, and he's Major, his title is Major, so he's Major. When you have another guy kind of running these little economic commercial empires around the Mediterranean, selling things like chocolate-covered cotton balls, things like that. It's so wacky, and it's so much fun, and just the whole premise of the book. If you're not aware of it, and if I remember correctly, it's basically like if you're signed up, if you're like fighting in a war, you must be insane, because that's the only way you can like rationalize all of the violence going on around, and all like how close death is like around every corner. So the only people who are really gung-ho about fighting in a war and really happy to be there must be insane. But then a way to get out of fighting a war is to convince everyone, like your leadership, that you're insane and that you're too insane to fight in the war. So it's a catch-22 no matter what you do. You're insane, whether you want to get out of the war or stay in, you're nuts. So yeah, in 8th place, Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. Then in 7th place, and I made a video about this author and other things he's written and talked about kind of more real world stuff, and I'm not a fan of this author's beliefs on real world things, but his works and this series in particular really got me into the sci-fi genre, and this is Orson Scott Card's Speaker for the Dead. So this is the sequel to Ender's Game. Ender's Game is a lot more popular. I imagine a lot of you have probably read that book. If you haven't read this one, I think this one is a little better than Ender's Game. And a big part of that is there's a big decision or kind of a big reveal about what the reality of a certain situation at the end of the first book. And so this book is kind of the beginning of this sequel trilogy dealing with the repercussions of that decision, especially those repercussions on the main character, Ender. There's also a lot about a really unique look at what alien life might be like and all of the misunderstandings. The misunderstandings that could lead to some really horrible crimes, horrible violence, if other life were to be discovered throughout the galaxy. This book also, I think, takes its time establishing this settlement on this planet, and Ender, as he's learning how to navigate the interesting family dynamics and the interesting personalities in this little city, he's also learning how to kind of make sense of almost a murder mystery thing going on here. And yeah, I really, really love this book, and just how, or what Card does specifically with the Pequeninos or the piggies, how their world works, how this alien race thinks about the world and thinks about things, and how that comes into conflict and misunderstanding with the human settlement. I think this book is beautiful. If it wasn't for what the stories that Orson Scott Card was telling with Ender's Game, then with this, and even with some of the other books in the wider like Ender verse, I'm not sure I would be as much of a sci-fi fan as I am. So yeah, Speaker for the Dead definitely gets 7th place on top 10 books of all time. Yeah. Then in 6th place, we have our first Malazan book, and this is Dancer's Lament by Ian C. Esselmont. And this is the first book in his prequel series. Kind of was a trilogy. Now there's 4 books in it, a couple more on the way, and this set of prequels that he's working on. I think of all those prequels, this one, and I think of all his books, this one is the closest, kind of most intimate character study of characters that are really powerful and a little bit difficult to comprehend and to understand in Esselmont's main books, but also in Stephen Erickson's main books in Malazan Book of the Fallen. So the fact that this book really kind of slows it down and kind of limits the setting to this one city under siege, which is pretty cool and pretty unique for the series. And limits the amount of characters to just a handful of people that we really get to know well. I think Esselmont took those unique opportunities, or took those unique decisions of his, and he really capitalized on them to add one of the most to add such an intriguing and such a powerful kind of opening chapter or early days chapter to the lives of a lot of the really powerful characters in the Malazan universe. Dancer's Lament, I think, does a really wonderful job at this. I think the other books in his prequel series are great as well. Some of those maybe rely a little bit too much for my liking on things like, oh, we're showing you this guy because we know, you're going to recognize him later as somebody else. Or we're like teasing this little cameo because this is a prequel and you can kind of play around with stuff like that. This book doesn't have too much of that. It's mostly just about this conflict of the siege going on, and an assassin trapped in the city during the siege, and him kind of working through the crime, the organized crime structure of the city. Also a mysterious mage working with children and just annoying everyone to no end. Also a really fascinating team of mages kind of as the last resort of defense for the leadership of the city. Really great book, Dancer's Lament. If you've read some of the other main Malazan series and you haven't picked up Esselmont's prequels yet, this is number 6 on my top 10 books of all time. Yeah, I'd say definitely give these prequels a try. Then in 5th place, a series, or this is a book in a series that I'm not finished with yet. I'm actually only 4 books deep. That's actually true for 2 books on here. But this one, it comes from Janny Wirtz. This is Warhost of Vastmark, book 3 in her Wars of Light and Shadow series. I will say kind of an asterisk with this one. This is the second book of Arc 2. So her series is broken up into these different narrative arcs. Arc 1 is book 1 of the series. Arc 2 is books 2 and 3. Book 2 is Ships of Marior. Book 3 is Warhost of Vastmark. There are editions of, hardcover editions of book 2, Ships of Marior, are this entire arc. So this isn't separated into its own third volume. It's just Ships of Marior and Warhost of Vastmark are both called Ships of Marior in that version. If that's the version you read, or if I were to kind of pretend that that's the version I read and Ships of Marior was part of this, this would still rank probably around here. It would still definitely be in my top 10 books of all time. But for now, because this is the version that I read, I'm just saying this like 500 pages or so, second half of Arc 2, Warhost of Vastmark is my 5th favorite book of all time. I think this delivers on a lot of the setup of that second book, and I think this second arc of this series, of the wider series, delivers on a lot of this setup from the first arc in the first book. And I think we really get into the heads of our main protagonist and our main antagonist here, and kind of their teams of supporters, their respective teams of allies, and why those people might be willing to support them and or not. And yeah, this one's kind of hard to talk about without spoiling things, but I'll just say everything set up in books 1 and then especially in book 2 that Wirtz had basically trained my mind to hope for and to kind of root for and to get excited about. All of that's paid off just brilliantly here. And also, as the series goes on, more and more comes out and like is teased about the magic of the world and these ancient races, the Paravians that used to rule here and live here, centaurs, unicorns, things like that. So yeah, this book has a little bit more of that. This book also has this brilliant, like 50, 60 page or so, almost sort of like a side story of a character that in any other series would just be some random side character dude. But here, the Wirtz takes the time and takes this like really long chapter early on to really show how this individual's perception of our protagonist changes drastically over the course of a month or two, and just how she describes that kind of change in someone and someone being a little flexible in their opinion of someone else, and how they view the world and things, just how convincingly she made that character's transition. She does things like that throughout this whole series, but really, I really love this book. So yeah, 5th place. Then in 4th place, and this might be a weird pick, it comes from one of my favorite series, but my favorite A Song of Ice and Fire book is still A Feast for Crows. These are, of course, by George R.R. Martin, and this book it's always been my favorite in the series because of its focus on, I guess, the new parts of the world that Martin starts to flesh out here, Dorne in the south and the Iron Islands. I really like the new point of view characters we get, giving us just kind of little snippets of what's going on in those corners of Westeros. But really, the majority of this book is the journey of Brienne, a knight character who is a really fun character and interesting in the first 3 books, but here she really becomes central to what's going on and kind of her journey, and you're rooting for her to be successful in her quest, but we know things that she doesn't know about where these girls are that she's looking for. And so that dramatic irony there is a lot of fun. Martin has a lot of fun with that. But then, of course, everything that Martin does with Cersei in King's Landing, in the wake of everything that happened in the 3rd book, and how he writes her to at times seem like she's coming up with a decent scheme, and that she might be pulling the wool over people's eyes. She might be manipulating someone effectively. And then to see things not really go her way a lot of the times, and to see, to get a clearer picture of who's really playing the better game, the better Game of Thrones. A ton of fun stuff with Cersei and King's Landing. A lot of fun with Brienne and just on her quest, her noble quest. One of kind of the most classic knight stories that you might find in a fantasy book, the brave knight, in this case Brienne, going off to find the lost princesses. Yeah, really fun stuff. And yeah, it's still definitely my favorite in the series. And now I read these when all 5 of the currently published books were out. I'm not sure how my feelings on this one would change if I had to, wait like whatever it was, the 4 years for this to come out and then the 5 years for Dance with Dragons to come out. Not sure if that would change how I felt about this, but having all 4 of them to read right in a row, this was easily the most fun and like the quickest that I was able to read any of the books in the series. So 4th place, A Feast for Crows, Book 4, and George R. R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire. And then in 3rd place, another series I've started pretty recently, and another series I'm only 4 books into the whole series overall, but I'm loving it. This is Diana Gabaldon's Dragonfly and Amber, Book 2 in her Outlander series. Now, I wasn't exactly sure where to place. I knew Outlander was going to have an entry on this top 10 list. I wasn't exactly sure where to place it, but the more and more I thought about it, like the first TV show that my wife and I watched together, a show that we talk a lot about, one of the first kind of series of books that we read around the same time, or started reading around the same time, has been Outlander. And that combined with the fact that I love time travel stories, I love historical fiction. I love, in particular, the 18th century European history, and the fact that this book, in particular, takes us to the continent of Europe, the mainland of Europe, in France for a little while, and we get to see Louis XV, and we get to see Versailles. But then, even back in Scotland, we get to see a lot more of the well-known historical moments well-known historical moments of the Second Jacobite Rising. I just really, really love this book. I love the whole series. I love this one in particular. It's still my favorite right now. Who knows, some of the later books in the series could overtake it. I'm not sure. We'll see when I get there. But yeah, just the fact that this series has a lot to do with the early day when my wife and I started dating, and then also the fact that it's all historical fiction, time travel, and this book in particular deals more with, if we're back in time and we know bad things are going to happen, what can we do to prevent those bad things? Can we prevent bad things, or are things destined to play out the way that they've always played out, regardless of if we're time traveling or not? This book, I think, tackles a lot of those questions more than any of the others have, at least so far. And yeah, the more and more I think about it, this is an easy 3rd place. Book 2 in Diana Gabaldon's Outlander series, Dragonfly and Amber, 3rd place. Then 2nd place, kind of the typical fantasy booktuber inclusion. It's going to be Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. I kind of went back and forth if I wanted to do this or the Silmarillion. While I do really love the Silmarillion, and I think on Goodreads I've given it 5 stars as well, but that's more, just mythic kind of tales and things all strung together as part of that back history. This is actually an extremely compelling narrative. I don't know what else I can say about Lord of the Rings that hasn't already been said. I did read these books in kind of a weird order. In kind of a weird order. Like, I read Fellowship of the Ring, then I read The Hobbit, then I read Two Towers, and then I waited a year before reading Return of the King. And that was the first time I read them. Then later I just read the main trilogy just all the way through, and that was definitely the more rewarding read. I've also always been a big fan of the films, but there's a lot that I like about the books even more than the films. I think one of the biggest strengths in the book's favor is in the movies. Sometimes when we're on those Frodo Sam bits with Gollum, sometimes I find my attention waning a little bit, drifting a little bit, and in the book, though, that Sam and Frodo segment with Gollum, that second half of Two Towers, really, I tore through that. That's one of my favorite sections of this entire series. I'm I'm not exactly sure. I'd probably need to give it another read to get more into the specifics of what Tolkien does in that section to make it so gripping and so engaging. But I know that I loved it because having watched the films when I was younger, when I got to that section, I was like, oh no, is this going to be slow? Is this going to be difficult to read? Especially the first time I was in middle school. So, so I was so pleasantly surprised to find that it wound up being one of my favorite sections. Yeah, if we break up the Lord of the Rings into its three books, I would say Two Towers is my favorite of the three. Yeah, so that's just one kind of small example of what I love about this series so much, and I again can't say too much that hasn't been said about this. Wonderful book, but I mean, really, just the fact that Tolkien, what he does with the Sam character in particular. Also, I think it's even clearer in the book, the PTSD kind of stuff with Frodo, and also for the book, the scoring of the Shire, all of that stuff, I think fits really nicely. And then there's also just some more lighthearted aspects here that are just a joy to read. A lot of the songs, the music, comic relief with like Tom Bombadil. This book is wonderful. It's a beautiful story. It only comes in second place though on 10 favorite books of all time. And that's because in the first place, we go back to Malazan. We already did my selection for Ian C. Esselmont, but in first place, I'm giving it to one of Steven Erikson's books. Now, the first video I did on my channel was a ranking of Malazan. In that video, I had book 7, Reaper's Gale, as my favorite of the whole series. I believe I said Reaper's Gale was my favorite then. However, that can change. It's kind of always a coin toss between that and this other book. And for today, for this top 10 list, I think right now I'm feeling most comfortable saying my favorite book of all time right now is book 8 in Malazan Book of the Fallen, Toll the Hounds. Again, this being the 8th book in a series of 10, it's hard to say too much about this without spoiling things. But if you know something about the way this series is structured and how so many of the books kind of jump around, book to book, you might have one over on this continent and another way over here, and then the next one might be on a third entirely separate continent. And things kind of jump around like that. Characters travel, but in large part, a lot of the times if you're in one setting, you can expect to see certain faces. By the time we get to book 8, Erikson returns us to a setting that we haven't been to since book 3, and to a lot of characters we haven't seen since then, but also some characters join them that have been around, or that have been around in, like, say, book 6, in even 7. And Erikson really, he just moves things towards this really powerful, beautiful conclusion in this one. Even fans who feel that the first several hundred pages of this one might be a little slower, I'm not sure if I'd agree with that, but even those Malazan fans who think some of this book's slow will probably agree that the last 200, 300 or so pages are absolutely amazing and incredible. And I mean, there's so much tragedy in here, and there's so much about grief, but really at the end of the day, it's more like how much we grieve over someone is a continued kind of demonstration of how much we love them and how much love there is in the world for people to grieve the loss of all these people that they loved, or whomever they loved. Yeah, and I mean, just the role that the idea of death plays, but also the god of death, the kind of scheming and the plans that are going on behind the scenes amongst the pantheon. Great stuff. There's also this really magical, cool concept in this series, a sort of prison world type of place, and what Erikson does with that place in this book, I think, is beautiful. We meet an artist in this one who Erikson fleshes out a little bit more in his prequel books, but that is one of my favorite characters of anything Malazan. This book is beautiful. Of all these top 10 books on this list, this one has kind of changed how I think about life and how I think about fantasy books and reading in general. This one has had the biggest impact on me just as a reader. And I think this whole series, to a certain extent, has impacted the direction of my academic interests. And this book is a big part of that as well. Is a big influencer on that as well. So thank you, Steven Erikson, for writing my favorite book of all time, Toll the Hounds. Again, as I when I was introducing this one, Reaper's Gale is right there with it. I could say a lot of, honestly, not very similar things about that one to this one. I think they're pretty different books, pretty different types of stories, and I love them both for totally different reasons, kind of. But on any day of the week, either of these books could get first place. It just so happens that the day I'm doing this, I'd really like to give the attention to Toll the Hounds, Book 8. So there you have it. That's my top 10 list of... Sorry. So there you have it. That's my top 10 list of all the books I've ever read. As you can tell, mostly sci-fi fantasy. I would love to hear all of your lists down below, or any thoughts you guys might have about the books right here. Thank you all so much for watching, and have a great day. Bye.